Hello and welcome back to the lab. Today on the bench is another PC, but no, we're not building a PC. We're not doing anything like that. This video is actually a Patron request for modernizing some of the computer knowledge that's out there. If you built a computer in the past, everything is wildly different today than it was even just 10 years ago. So this video is for someone who may or may not need to assemble a computer in the near-ish future when this video is being recorded. It is February of 2024, and I need to preface that because the way things move in the IT and computer industry, some of this advice may age like bad milk in the years to come. But for right now, this is where we are, 2024, and this is what we're looking into. If you built a computer in the past, haven't had to in a while, everything served you well, but you're starting to think about maybe needing a refresh or something like that, this is going to be the video for you. I'm going to pack a ton of information into this video, and we'll see what we can cover. This is just an example piece, but we'll start with a computer that I engineered about 2 weeks ago for a client, and we'll talk about essentially the heart of the computer, which is the CPU. All right, I have printed off the offering, one of the latest offerings from Intel. This is the spec sheet on a 14700K. Not a bad processor, kind of hits in the $350 to $400 range at the moment, but if you've dealt with any vintage hardware, things like this, some of these specs, it's just an absolute beast of a processor today. It's an absolute monster processor when compared to anything vintage like Core 2 Duo and older. Duos were the first dual-core CPUs. I go back to when CPUs were just over 100 megahertz, and I go back even further than that, into the era when PCs didn't even have a hard drive. So when comparing it to that era of computers, this is just an absolute monster CPU. We have 20 cores. Now, something new, I can't remember if it started in the 13 series or the 14 series, but something new is they've added performance cores and efficient cores. This is different from the traditional hyper-thread of the past, but somewhat similar. So this CPU has 20 total cores, but we get 28 threads. So we can execute 28 different programs at a time in this CPU, which is absolutely insane. But for some of the more vintage stuff that my audience works on, you would be more interested in the single-threaded performance of the CPU. Most of the applications I run to support the gear that I work on, they're all single-threaded. They can't take advantage of any of the cores. So if you max out the frequency of a single core, that's about it. That's all you've got. So one of the ways modern compute has done some things is they've packed a ton of cores at a low clock speed, or they've packed still a ton of cores at a high clock speed. But this 5.6, 5.8, this is kind of hitting a physics limitation in the silicon itself, and we're not seeing a lot faster than that. It's very rare that you'll see something turbo up to 6.0. And that's still because even at the turbo power, this thing's pulling 253 watts out of the power supply, which is why some of the coolers that I need on these CPUs are just monster coolers. This air cooler may not be enough for 253 watts. A good core count, modern CPUs are just absolute monsters for most workloads. You're not going to max out the CPU. One of the few things that I do here in the lab that really hammers a multi-core CPU, which is that CAD box that I did a video on a while back, is actually rendering videos for YouTube. So working with video, working with CAD, working with any of the creative packages, things like that, it's going to push one of these CPUs it can push it to its limit. Back when I got started with video, long time ago, it was 8.5 hours for 30 minutes of video rendered out. The CAD computer will do 45 minutes of YouTube video in 6.5 minutes. So it's really cruising. Single-threaded performance is one of the things you'd want to look at what this turbo frequency is. Now, this is essentially an overclock, but it's a rated overclock, so it's something the CPU is doing on its own, so it's nothing to worry about. The K at the backside of an Intel part number means the multiplier is unlocked, so you could overclock the CPU if you want. Nowadays, I don't overclock anything anymore. I got plenty of horsepower at my fingertips. Don't even need to. I'm not also going for benchmark records or anything like that. I need the PC to work reliably, regularly, and on time when I need it to. The base frequency is about what the CPU will run at when it's not turboing. You'll almost never see a CPU sit there. It'll either be slower to save power, or it'll be turboing because you're asking it to work. So nothing too crazy here. This was an absolute monster CPU in the PC that I built. I think this is a 14700 is what I actually put in the viewer's lab computer a couple videos back. This is actually the processor we used. Absolute monster performance out of it, and was very reasonable. Next up is system RAM. So if you're building a computer these days, a good target is start at 16, work up from there as you need it. Very few workloads will need more than 32 or 64 gigs of RAM, especially when you start playing with VMs and things like that. You chew up RAM very quickly. That is why we have a box of server RAM here in the lab. Oh, this is PC2, so it's DDR2 server RAM. So I do keep a large amount of memory in stock because I need to maintain some older hardware, especially for some of the equipment that I need here in the lab. I need to still support 5.25-inch floppy disks. I need to still support 3.5-inch floppy disks. I need to read data off of old PATA hard drives every once in a while, and SATA hard drives, of course. So I need to maintain some older machines. It's actually some of what this guy is. One of my big beefs with modern cases these days is there's no room for optical drives, but we'll get into that here in a little while. RAM, 16 to 32 gigs, maybe 64 if you have a heavy workload. Especially now that we're into DDR5, not too picky on the RAM speeds. I do not like using the fastest RAM modules available. I've had stability issues just with the timings and the speeds, some boot problems, things like that. So I'll drop it back 1 or 2. If you have, at least in the Intel side of the fence, it's called an XMP setting in the BIOS, which is the extreme memory profile. That's setting the RAM at the correct timings for the module itself. If you do not turn that on, you will run it DDR whichever, in this case 2, but it could be 4, could be 5, could be 3. The base clock speed for DDR5, or 4, or 3, or 2. But you will see a huge difference in performance turning on XMP versus running non-XMP. Running non-XMP could do stability as well. The other thing is if you're going to load up a PC with RAM, the more RAM that the unit has, sometimes the quirkier it gets. So make sure the RAM kits that you purchase are on the supported list at the size that you need. I had a flaky BIOS and a motherboard that I had to troubleshoot with a motherboard manufacturer, who I will not name in this video, but they didn't like the fact that I was using 2 32 gig kits that were certified for 32 gig but weren't certified for 64 gig. So before they'd really talk to me and actually troubleshoot the problem with me, I had to go get 64 gigs of RAM that was on their supported list so I could check the green box that said, yep, everything's right. The other thing is if you are having flaky system instability, just some general weirdness that can't be explained but the system's not behaving correctly, stress test the memory first. I helped another technician figure out his personal computer, and there was a set of G-Skill memory where there was a bad lot. It was well known that his lot was bad, and it would run fine, but then when we stress tested overnight, errors would show up. So we didn't even know it was a bad lot when we were looking at it, but that was a long time ago. And that is definitely not a dig on any specific manufacturer. It can happen to anyone at any time. One of the things they did in modern computers, and you'll have to check the manual for the motherboard, is if you are installing the memory, They started it in the i-series CPUs. They moved the memory controller off of the motherboard into the chip. So that's why on those CPUs, the RAM slots that the memory modules are plugged into is really important. So especially if you're not populating all the RAM slots in the beginning, the computer will be picky as to which slot the RAM is plugged into. So triple check the manual when you set the machine up to correct some initial power on issues. Next thing up, we'll talk about CPU cooler. If your CPU ships with a stock CPU cooler, obviously that stock cooler is rated to cool that specific CPU, not in an overclocked format. It's only rated to do base stock clocks. So if you're going to push the CPU any harder than stock, you're probably going to want to look at upgrading the cooler. This is a nice beefy air cooler on this one. I'm still using air coolers on machines that I build for customers, depending on the CPU. If it's down the CPU stack a little bit and I'm not seeing 250 watts of CPU power, an air cooler is just fine. One of my favorites is the Hyper 212. Works very, very well keeping CPUs cool. It is a kind of large cooler, not overly large. It's smaller than this, but it's also relatively inexpensive. So that would be a good starting point. The higher end CPUs that do not come with a cooler in the box, I usually put those underwater. I have an AIO radiator. Those AIO radiators are sealed, non-serviceable. You never need to drain them. You never need to fill them up. They're sealed for life. They will work until they don't, and when they don't, you replace them. I know a lot of guys like playing around with custom water loops, things like that. I do enough antifreeze changes in my cars. I don't need to do antifreeze changes in my computers. So, the AIOs are not leak-proof. They do every once in a while leak, especially when how the tubes are routed. So when you're moving stuff in and around the computer, make sure the tubes aren't too tight, too stretched, and make sure that watch them for leaks. I know people they have leaked on. I have cleaned up some of the leaks from them. It doesn't happen often, but it does. Flipping to the back panel of the case, pretty much any modern motherboard you get today is going to have lots of USB. This one's even got some USB-C, which is pretty nice for this board because this is an older PC. This is a 5th gen i7, I think, is what's sitting in here. But one of the things that's important is I wanted to talk about these. So I do a lot with Bluetooth here in the lab. Bluetooth files back and forth between things. Some of my mice are Bluetooth, things like that. Modern motherboards, if you need Bluetooth, you will get a Wi-Fi card with it. You can turn off the Wi-Fi card if you don't need it, but you can't. It will be rare to find Wi-Fi and no Bluetooth, or Bluetooth and no Wi-Fi. They usually come together and they share the same antenna pack. So this one has a 3-pole antenna that magnetically sticks somewhere and works very good. Don't have many signal problems with it at all. Sound on a computer, if you're not going USB, some USB speakers are very good. I have had some crispy audio with USB components, so I have moved back off of USB for audio because it just was frying in the audio stream, and I fought with it for a long time, and I think I've finally figured out it's the version of Windows, because the hardware's fine, the drivers are fine. On the computer, if it's running Windows 7, it works fine. If it's running anything later than 7, USB audio is a little funny. So I've actually gone back to analog audio and using the onboard sound cards, or adding a sound card if the PC didn't come with it. That being said, I am quite sensitive to that from some of the jobs that I've had in a past professional life. I had to be really sensitive to audio quality setting up theaters. Okay, we will talk about graphics cards. This computer has actually a much older graphics card. This is a 670, I believe. The newer modern graphics cards have gotten humongous. This is small these days. Newer cards would come down to about here for the heat sinking and things like that, and they are power-hungry monsters. I would not build a computer these days without an 800-watt power supply in it. unless I had one that I was specifically building to be micro and purpose driven, things like that. But for a general purpose PC, 800, 850 or better, because it's going to keep up with the graphics cards and also the CPUs. I had 253 watts of CPU in that 14700. Well, if I have a 600 watt power supply, I throw 600 watts of graphics on top of it, I'm really hitting that 800 watt limit already, and I really have just gotten started. I haven't put drives in it yet or anything like that. So 800 is about the minimum. Graphics cards, find out what you need. What's really driving graphics cards choice these days is what resolution you want to run the monitor at. So the three prevailing choices are 1080p, 2K, or 4K. All are good. Nothing wrong with any of them. But LCD monitors, if you do not run them at the resolution they are recommended running at, they look really, really poor. It's just the nature of the LCD technology, and it's not a specific manufacturer or anything like that. All of them look that way. So you'll get one or two resolutions that look good and one that looks great like it's supposed to, because that's the optimum. For the 4K monitors, though, that would be the 4K resolution, so that shrinks the icons significantly. Scaling is starting to take over, so we are seeing applications that support scaling and support the higher resolutions and things like that. 8K is still a ways off, except at the extreme high end. But 4K can have its usefulness in the lab. My CAD workstation, the core monitor there is 4K. The bench monitor is HD. It's 1080. And my, we'll call it gaming computer, it's running 4K for its primary monitor as well. The secondaries are running HD on all of them, so 1080. So I don't run into a problem where one graphics card can't drive all the monitors. I did run into that recently on a, just as recent as a 970. We had a 970 that couldn't run two 2K monitors. It could run one 2K and then one at 1080, so I had to upgrade that to a, he got a 4070 Ti Super to replace the 980 because he got monitor upgrades. For graphics card upgrades, there are two big players in the graphics card market, NVIDIA and AMD. If you have one, it is recommended, just from a ease of upgrade standpoint, to replace it with the same core brand. You don't have to go, like if I have a Republic of Gamers graphics card from Asus, I don't necessarily have to go with another Asus card, but taking an NVIDIA computer to an AMD computer or vice versa can cause Windows gets really cranky about the drivers. It's more a Windows problem than a hardware problem. And you will spend some time scrubbing the drivers, things like that. If I have customers that are adamant about that, it's actually easier for me to back up their computers, reinstall Windows with a new graphics card, and do the change out they would like. I know some people are going to say it's heavy-handed, but it does, and it does cause a little bit more work on my part, but it does reduce the callbacks and the issues that the user runs into in the past. I personally, when I fought with the Dell Precision that I had, that the sound over HDMI coming out of an AMD card was rotated 90 degrees. The sound field, I was looking straight ahead, and the sound field was coming out like it was coming this way. So very, very strange issue on that one. So, but that was the computer that happened when I burned up the computer power supply for the media center. Every graphics card will come with a recommended wattage on the power supply if you are going to push that graphics card near its capacity, i.e. run 4K on a 1030. Believe the power ratings of the graphics card. That's ultimately why that computer fried up, was it ran 1080 just fine for 3.5 years. I upgraded the TV to 4K, and I set the power supply on fire. So if the graphics card manufacturer says you need a 600 watt power supply, give it some overhead so you're not overstressing the power supply too much. As with everything, computer and technology, heat's the enemy. The hotter the components get, the shorter their lifespan will get, and the cooler we can keep it running, theoretically, the longer it will run without issues. Next up, storage. So I have four different types of hard drives here. We have old school spinning disk rotating platters in the 3.5-inch version and the 2.5 version. This one's a little bit special. This is a server hard drive, came out of a Dell machine. You will notice the connector's broken right here. We have the data connector, the power connector, but this connector has some extra stuff going on right here. So we have this connector that's straight across. Main difference between the two is this is a traditional SATA drive, needs a SATA cable. Still very viable storage, and we'll get into that here in a little bit. This is a SAS drive, serial attached SCSI, and primarily used in servers and other frame hard drive style computers. That's why it's in a cage. The thing with a SAS controller is the SAS controller is backwards compatible. You can plug, if it physically fits, obviously a 3.5 will not go in a 2.5-inch bay, but you can plug a SATA hard drive into a SAS controller. 99% of the time it'll work. You cannot plug a SAS drive into a SATA controller. It will not work. So if you're looking for some higher end, especially some of the rack equipment, you can get some stuff really cheap if you go to the SAS drives on the secondary market, because it's primarily a server technology. Nobody really wants them. Getting out of the spinning disks and into the flash storage, we have a 2.5-inch flash drive. No one is sponsoring this video, so this is just one that I had sitting around and on hand. Same thing for the Dell drive. But this is an old 256 gig 870 Evo. You will notice these things are relatively light compared to these. They have no moving components, no spinning disks, and no heads to crash. However, flash storage has a tendency to go bad with zero notice. So whereas spinning disks, when they start to go bad, if you're sensitive to it, the computer will start getting really slow. You'll start the hard drive will start churning. It'll boot, but it'll take forever to get there. Things like that, and the drive kind of starts showing it's in distress. These things, I have had users shut down their computer, come into the office, open their computer, and the data's gone. They go bad with zero warning. That's not a brand thing. This is not a dig on Samsung. This is the drive technology itself. When they go bad, and that's it. There's no recovering it. When these go bad, you can hook it up to a rack, let it sit for days while it pulls the data off, and you get some warning, and you may be able to get the data back. Poof. It's just gone. Same thing for this drive. This is an M.2 drive. This is a 2.5-inch. This was the primary drive size for laptops, and if you have an older laptop that you'd like to get going, and really give it some performance. If it's on an old 2.5-inch spinning disk, you throw one of these in there, it'll wake the machine up significantly. I've got a Dell 630C laptop because I need some 16-bit applications to support the lab that I have Windows 2000 on, running on an SSD. It was the most advanced laptop that I could find that I could get support for Windows 2000 and have a SATA port and a wireless card. Very unique list. It fit the bills, and that's why it's here. Oh, and it had a module bay, which had a 3.5-inch drive and a CD drive, and it had removable batteries. So I do keep a Dell D630C kicking around the lab for when I need to use 16-bit applications, because any 64-bit OS will emulate a 32-bit application, but it will not run a 16-bit application. So if you need some older software, you'll have to go to an older operating system to possibly get that software to go. Next step up in the speed realm is the M.2. This puts the hard drive right on the PCI Express bus of the machine, very close to the CPU, physically and logically, and is an incredibly fast hard drive. This is how we get our 16-second boot times and all that other craziness out of some of these machines. Wonderful drives. The way I usually engineer a computer is I will put the operating system drive, Windows or Linux, on a flash storage, M.2 preferable, 2.5 next step down. Bulk storage, on the other hand, my OS and my programs will be on this drive for load times, things like that. Bulk storage, like the video that the camera's recording, things like that for YouTube, I still use spinning disks. Now, most of my computers here, I have four drives in RAID 10, simply because working on so many computers, the drives just kind of accumulate. You should see the piles in the corner. It's actually kind of ridiculous. That RAM box that I had is like one of 12. That's just full of memory. So parts just kind of multiply, and what I'll do is if I get a 1, 2, or 4 terabyte, I will set that aside, and as long as my customer doesn't mind, I DoD wipe the drive, so obviously there's no data problems. Then I'll set them up in a RAID array. So if I use 1 terabyte drives, RAID 10 will give me 2 terabytes of storage at about 75% the speed of an SSD. So it's actually pretty good. Now, you do take the performance hit of A, needing 4 drives, and B, chewing up power for 4 drives, and a couple of other things. But it's also redundant storage, so if I have a drive crap out, I have notice, I can put another drive in, get it up and going, and keep going. Can be a wonderful system. The back-end file server for the lab is RAID 6, which is just a different type of RAID, but it has many, many, many more drives in it than 4. So we have our OS and our programs for load times on flash storage, M.2 if possible, NVMe. It essentially, the tier goes NVMe, mSATA, 2.5, spinning disk if you have to. That'll give you the best performance, and especially jumping from spinning disk to SSD. Responsiveness difference of the machine, even if none of the other hardware changes. I have shoehorned these into many, many, many users' laptops because they wanted to stretch the hardware a little further. And so we pulled out the old spinning disk, put this in, I've reloaded the OS, and they've run it for several more years before they felt they needed to upgrade. So it was money well spent. These used to be horrendously expensive. They have now come down. Anything under 2 terabytes is a reasonable cost. If you break the 2 terabyte barrier, again, this is being recorded in 2024, February. If you break the 2 terabyte barrier, the price starts ratcheting up significantly, but anything under 2 terabytes, and the price is very reasonable. Okay, the case itself, essentially what we stare at when we're looking at them. So modern cases, what you will find is when you look at modern cases, there won't be nice bays where you can put, Blu-ray burners, things like that, and other things. There will be glass. So a couple of things for those who are possibly new to this. That is tempered glass. Do not try drilling it. Do not try cutting it. Do not try breaking it. If you do, it will shatter, guaranteed. The other thing is, it is very fragile on the edges. Tempered glass will take a face hit a couple of times and not shatter. It will not take an edge hit. It's very, very weak on the edges. So especially when you're setting it down, things like that, be very careful on it. Because when they go all at once. It's not like you get a small crack. It's tempered glass. When it goes, it just crumbles. It's just the nature of the beast. It's the way the glass is made. But one of the reasons why I keep a couple of drives or a couple of PCs around like this is due to the fact that these I need to support 5.25 inch bays. I also need to have a computer which has some. I need to get a 3.5 inch disc and a 5.25 inch disc in a case. We'll do that at some point because I still have every once in a while occasion to read a 5.25 inch disc, even though that is the really old side of the fence. But actually, they go back further, 8 inch and then magnetic tape. Nowadays, you'll be hard pressed to get a space for a CD burner. There's always a USB option if you really need one. That's the way I've taken care of that on the CAD computer is I have a USB drive. But we'll get some of these out of here and into my other computer, which I keep around specifically for the bays that it has in it. So that's just something new with modern computing. The other modern computing phase or craze that I'm not too keen on, but I understand it, is especially at the higher end where you're playing around with higher end parts, things like that, the need to RGB everything. I do have some computers that had RGB, that do have some RGB parts that they were all of that. It was all that was available when I put the machine together, so it's what I had to run with. And I've seen computers that would make a disco floor blush. So it's that is you either like it or you don't. I'm kind of in the middle. I'm one of the weird people that's in the middle. I could take it or leave it. One of the things you can do if you get a couple things with RGB, like the AIO CPU coolers, you can actually set them up for temperature monitoring. So if the computer starts to get over hot, it'll glow red. That I have found to be somewhat useful. But for the most part, everything else is an aesthetic. Okay, one more thing on power supplies and power cables. This is a standard power connector for a PC. Anybody who's done this for a while or worked with test equipment knows this is kind of the standard NEC power connector. And if you've done this for a little while, you probably have a box of these. Some modern power supplies are actually starting to have this connector on them. A little bit different, square, and the pins are sideways instead of up and down. This is a 20 amp connector. So what you're finding is in power supplies that are over 1200 watts, the 14s and the 16s, is especially in the 120 volt areas of the world, these need to be able to carry possibly up to 20 amps. So at a 1600 watt power supply, 1750 is, it's really like 1875, but 1750 is about maxing out a 15 amp circuit. So with a 1600 watt power supply, plus monitor, plus a couple other things like that, if you punch the power supply as hard as it can go, you're getting pretty close to actually tripping the breaker and coming up on that 15 amp limit. So things will actually start to get warm in the electrical outlet, things like that. So it's something to be aware of. And if you know you're going to have a 1600 watt power supply that's going to get banged on a lot and it's going to run close to full power a lot, might be worth upgrading to a 20 amp circuit just to keep the temperature down and keep the ratings, give you some more headroom in the ratings. Also, size your UPS accordingly as well if you use one. My CAD computer, when I went from a RTX 2070 graphics card to a 2080 that's in it right now, the UPS is very cranky when it goes to full power. It's I only have a 700 watt UPS on that one, and it is going. It can do 120% for a limited amount of time, but I am hitting that headroom. So I either need to drop the graphics card down a little bit or buy a bigger UPS. All right, thanks for joining me in the lab today. Hope that answers some questions on modernizing the computer building experience. As always, if you have any questions, I will be in the description below. I do read all the comments on all the videos. So let me know how we're doing, and let me know if there's anything you'd like to see. Patreons are running about 4 videos ahead right now, so if you'd like some more content, take a look at the Patreon page. And I will see everybody in the next video. As always, more is on the way.